Okay, so previously that we had talked about, yes, that's for one of our students saying previously on our channel here, was the idea that yes, you have three-part exam coming up, and part one is on Monday. It was supposed to be today, but due to decorating, things had to be moved back. I don't like Monday exams either, but we are starting to run short on time. So with that, it's our opportunity to still hold you accountable for information to be successful in, per se, what's expected of you on Monday. Okay, so what was the first animal that we talked about in this chapter? It was a link between reptiles and birds. Yep, the Archaeopteryx. So it had characteristics of both birds and reptiles. So what might be something that would be reptilian-like in the Archaeopteryx? And one thing to think about is, what do birds not have that reptiles do? You wouldn't want to say talons because, as we can see, Jerry doesn't have very big talons, but he still has them. So scales would not be correct. So what might be reptilian-like? Okay, so claws and talons would be fairly close. What about rib structure? Do birds and reptiles have thoracic ribs? Yes. Do birds and reptiles have abdominal ribs? There's your no question. Who has the abdominal ribs and who lacks abdominal ribs? Yes, reptiles have abdominal ribs. Class Aves or birds do not. What else might distinguish reptiles from birds besides these ribs? Think of the eagle video that we saw, or raptors. So the golden eagle, a very large bird, known as could say a frigate bird as well. So if raptors are meat eaters, which they are, do birds chew? No, because we associate chewing with what type of oral structure? Yeah, so do birds have teeth? No, they do not. Okay, so within the Archaeopteryx, it had teeth, so that is also reptilian-like. The abdominal ribs is reptilian-like. What about a really long neck? Do we see long necks in birds? Yes, we do. Okay? So an example of that would be, you could say maybe a whooping crane or great heron, flamingos, even ostriches have a really long neck. That is avian-like. Also, what would be present in the Archaeopteryx as well. So what sets them apart is the idea that abdominal ribs were found in the Archaeopteryx, where they're not found in birds. Okay? So what is the difference between a carnite and a ratite bird? You'd have to know what that means. It means flight. Which ones fly, which ones don't? Carnite fly and ratite do not. So what's an example of a ratite bird then that does not fly? They can, not great distances, they can become airborne. We've said this bird already has a long neck. There's a whole bunch you could use. Like even this. Who delivers babies, mythologically speaking, or a myth? What type of bird was known for delivering babies? Storks. Storks would be, although if they're delivering, they're probably flying. That's probably not a good example. So birds that don't fly would be like emus, ostriches, flamingos would be an example of that. So we said a golden eagle would possibly, or any eagle for the most part, would be an example of a frigate bird. It means you got to think big. So for the most part, raptors are very large birds, like eagles, falcons, or excuse me, eagles and hawks, um, and albatrosses, vultures. Those are all that of, what do I want to say, frigate birds. What about falcons, though? What does it mean to be a frigate bird? The weight of its feathers weighs more than its bones. That's one of the characteristics. What else? Is typically known as more than what? How many feet? About 6 to 7 feet. So when you look at falcons and kites, those are raptors as well. But would you be led to believe that those are frigate birds? No, they're not, because their wingspan just is not big enough. Okay. So what is a structure found here that is associated with respiration? You could use the common name, which starts with an F, okay? Or excuse me, starts with a W, or the scientific name that starts with an F. We said when you're cooking for that, you grab one side, someone else grabs the other. That's the wishbone. That's the common name. You know the more scientific name starts with an F. It's called the furcula, okay? So that is how respiration is actually initiated, is how once that lowers, when we say lowers, when it pulls out like this, okay, that's how respiration is actually initiated. Okay. So after seeds, flesh, whatever, goes through the back of the throat or the pharynx, down the esophagus, where does it go after that? This storage structure starts with a C. Say that again. You said it, but I just want to make sure you say it a little louder. Yeah, the crop. And that's where food is temporarily stored. Where does it go after the crop? Stomach is kind of a vague term. It's something within the stomach that we want you to be associating, secreting gastric juices. For mammals, it's the stomach, but for birds, it's something a little different. Starts with a P. A pro something. Nothing? Proventricularis, and that was, I believe, part of your short answer part. So we said, describe food entering from the back of the throat all the way through the cloaca, and inside that, what we consider the stomach, is the proventricularis. Okay. So to have a high metabolic rate, which means endothermic, which humans, mammals, birds are all endothermic, means you have to have two things at all times. What are those? Lots and lots of oxygen. And think of it this way. Do snakes, alligators, which are reptiles, do they need to consume food daily? No, they're not, because they are ectothermic or cold-blooded. If you're endothermic, you have to constantly take in nutrients. So you need lots of oxygen and lots of nutrients. So with that, okay, what is it that allows birds to take in that large amount of oxygen? What's inside their lungs? Not the air sacs. Okay? It starts with a B. Because as air goes down, it's going to goes down through the trachea, okay, and then it splits at the bronchial tree. And birds have two of those, so that's called a parabronchi. So because of that, they can take in large amounts of oxygen. Okay? So with that, where does air go first after it's inhaled? Down through the trachea. Even though the parabronchi allows them to absorb lots of oxygen, that's not where it goes first because it's a two-cycle system. Where does the air go first after it's inhaled? Not the lungs. I know you got it right because you wrote it down on your paper because I remember reading it. So if you got it right then, I would like to think we can get it right now. It's a type of sac. You have some in the front of the lungs and some in the back of the lungs. What might mean front in anatomical terms? You have ventral, but they're not ventral air sacs. They are, right. So you have anterior air sacs. What's the other one? So what's opposite of anterior? Posterior. So air enters the posterior air sacs first. Then it exhales, goes into the lungs. Then it inhales again. Air enters those posterior air sacs, and then air moves to the anterior air sacs, and then is exhaled. The idea behind that is birds are always constantly getting oxygen, whether they're inhaling or exhaling. Okay. What is the last portion of the digestive system in birds? Reptiles have it too, and it was on your exam that you located on the alligator. What is that terminal part of the digestive tract? Starts with a C. Yeah, the cloaca, that's right. Okay. When we think of this structure, now you might have this, you don't need to draw it again, it's just for our own, what do I say, knowledge or benefit. What are 5 parts? What do you suppose we're drawing here? It's a feather, okay? And the most common type of feather we would consider is possibly this type, which is not the flight feathers. Those are primaries and secondaries, but what covers the chest of these? It gives shape, or what? Starts with a C. Because you have these types of feathers, you have these types, and then this one that starts with the C gives it shape. Contour. Okay, so this might be a contour feather. Okay, so what's significant about this to this? This is a specific what? Starts with a Q. This is the quill. Okay? So if this is what we consider the shaft, why is their terminology different from where this ends and this begins? So what you could say then, and from here, these are 2 different parts. So once the quill ends, it changes to what? It's got 2 names to it. That's one. Or, like for instance, in human anatomy terms, this is the what of a long bone. or a mine blank? Starts with that. Okay, shaft or rachis. Okay, so those are two totally different structures because once these begin, you could say that you put about, each one of these is called an individual what? So this is an individual, this is an individual. Starts with the letter B. Close. Okay, these are barbs, and once you put a whole bunch of barbs together, it's not barbules yet, but rather starts with a V. Yep, so these are veins then. Okay, not this. That's circulation, so we want veins there. And then these tiny structures on here that lock it together. You said it earlier. Yeah, so these are barbules then. Okay. So, let's see here. In mammalian reproduction, there are still mammals that lay eggs, but the majority of them develop inside of the mother's womb, which would be a placenta. Why do humans and mammals that are placentals, cattle, horses, cats, dogs, why does the embryo not have to worry about toxic buildup inside of its mother's womb? And we said everyone has this structure right here. It's the navel area, but there's something that was hooked up to there. The umbilical cord, why was that important? It not only gets its nutrients, but as those nutrients are delivered and energy is created, byproducts are given off, which can become quite toxic. But does the embryo inside of this uterus that's developing in mammals now have to worry about that? No, because if nutrients are delivered through the umbilical cord, waste products will also be taken out of the umbilical cord. That's not the case in birds. Okay? So as this embryo is developing inside this egg, okay, this starts to build up. This is a toxic substance that happens because of, you could say, cellular respiration. What gives energy and growth? Urea starts to build up inside this egg. But this cannot be taken out of here because there's no umbilical cord here. So how does Mother Nature account for the buildup of this urea? It converts it to something else, which was what type of acid? It's similar to this. It's a type of acid. It also starts with a U. Uric acid. Okay, so what happens is as this urea begins to build up, it gets converted to uric acid, which we'll just say these X's means it's forming crystals in here. That does not harm that embryo in there. For some reason, the way the man upstairs designed birds, just the idea that urea that's building up is going to be converted to this uric acid, which then can be stored harmlessly. Okay, then to wrap this up, what are two brain structures maybe what might take care of the coordination and flying? Is it a medulla oblongata? Is it a cerebrum? Is it a cerebellum? Or what? It's exactly what it is. The cerebellum coordinates its flight. Okay? Then if the cerebellum doesn't do functions like singing and vocalization, it must be a different structure. And we spent very little time because that was handed to you that you didn't have to write it out, and that's called the corpus striatum, is the idea that that is a structure that does singing. And why might that be important to birds? Well, it has a lot to deal with this vocalization of saying, not only here I am, it could be for mating partners who are maybe monogamous, okay? Or it could be those who are polygamous, which means maybe they're vocalizing to, per se, attract a mate. Multiple ones, that's what polygamous means, or polygamy. But more often than not, I believe this vocalization saying, this is my territory, stay away. Here I am, this is mine, okay? So the corpus striatum does the singing, the cerebellum does that of the coordination. Okay, that's 21 minutes. That's probably far enough. Hopefully this review session will help, and you have vocabulary terms that you're responsible for as well, and those were handed back to you, which if it still has to be documented for some individuals. You just have to take it so I can document it and we can move on. All right, so I would venture to think that, okay, exam on Monday, then you've had these bird structures or bird names. We'll do that on Tuesday. And then the ducks and your essay questions on Wednesday. It's 1 right in a row. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so continue to associate the colors of those birds so you know the names, and then we will go forward from there next week. All right, I'll catch up to you, or tune in possibly next time, which I would say, but there is really no next time on account of I will get you your bonus questions to you on Monday, as well as your essay questions, because since it's part 1, it won't take very long. Okay, catch up to you next time.